All right, can anybody tell me what is a smart object? Not quite. Okay, so we've been talking about it for the last few classes, how we use it, why we would use it, right? But what are smart objects? So a smart object or smart objects are layers that contain image data from raster or vector images, such as Photoshop or Illustrator files. Smart objects preserve an image's source content with all its original characteristics, enabling you to perform non-destructive editing to the layer. This paragraph explains what a smart object is. By the way, I'm reading that from the Adobe Help X website, and I will send you guys that link. Let me do that right now. So for those of you that want to follow along or review it after class, you can do so. This page goes in depth into understanding smart objects, what they are, how we use them. All right. So let's just continue along. In Photoshop, you can embed the contents of an image into a Photoshop document. In Photoshop, you can also create linked smart objects whose contents are referenced from external image files. The contents of a linked smart objects are updated when its source image file changes. Linked smart objects are distinct from duplicated instances of a smart object within a Photoshop document. With linked smart objects, you can use a shared source file across multiple Photoshop documents, which is a familiar and welcome concept for web designers. So there are actually two types of smart objects. You have linked smart objects and embedded smart objects. We're going to go over what they are in a little bit. But what is the benefit? What are the benefits of smart objects? Anybody can tell me any of the benefits you can think of from our last classes, what we've been doing? Or from earlier? All right. So with smart objects, you can perform non-destructive transforms. What is a transform? You can scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective transform, or wrap a layer without losing original image data or quality, because the transforms don't affect the original data. What do we mean by that? Let me give you an example. We have LeBron here. And as I mentioned, if you mask an object like this, you're actually working with the entire layer, everything that's invisible, right? So you realize it goes all the way to the edges. But if we convert that to a smart object, what we now have is just LeBron as an object. If you notice, the borders are now right on the edge, right? And we have this image, or the image of LeBron, as a smart object. Now you can tell it's an embedded smart object by the icon here, and I'll show you a link to one shortly. So what is a transform? A transform is anyhow we, I don't use the word transform again, but transform or modify the object. So that would include resizing it. This is a transformation. Rotating it, right? Skewing it. So skewing it, right? Adjusting the perspective, right? All of these are transforms that we can apply to the object. Everybody see that? Now, what do they mean by transforms and non-destructive?
Yes,
All right. So a non-destructive transformation means that the original image, the original context of the image is maintained. So if I go to my smart object here, which is currently layer 0, and I right click and I go to edit the contents of the smart object, what it shows me is the original contents of that smart object in its non-destroyed format. So in other words, in the document that we're currently working on, our smart object looks like this, but the smart object itself knows that this is what it is, and the changes that you made to it to get it to look like this doesn't destroy the original content. Everybody understand that? Let me explain why that might be important. So let me close that. And let me duplicate that smart object. I'm going to rasterize it, meaning it's no longer going to be a smart object. All right. If I were to try to get this back to the original dimensions, I could, right? But what's going to happen is I'm going to suffer a loss of quality. I will never actually get it back exact. I mean, if I knew exactly the way I modified it, I could reverse it, but let me just do something close, right? So this is what I got back, but just look at the differences between the right sleeve here and the left sleeve here. Let me just show you what the original looks like. Go back to edit the contents of the smart object. You can see the right sleeve pretty nice and crisp, the left sleeve pretty nice and crisp. But look at that. When I modified it and I rasterized it, if I try to get it back, notice I lost quality here. So that blurriness that you see on the right sleeve, right, and on the right side of the chest where it was really small and I made it bigger, actually is a loss of quality. Everybody can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right. However, if I go back to my smart object, right, I can actually, hold on. Well, an easy way, there's no easy way to revert this smart object, but an easy way to get back to the original content, if I go edit contents, I can actually drag that object back into the document, right? That is from the smart object. So compare the two of them. So the smart object maintained the image quality. Notice when I bring it back, see what I have? The original masked layer. And even if I look into my smart object, what I'm looking at is the original masked layer in its non-destructive edited state. Yeah. So that's what we mean here when we say we can perform non-destructive transforms. Everybody understand that? Any questions on that? No. All right. So more benefits of smart objects. Well, are you guys seeing my screen? Let me adjust that.
Yes, yes, we see it, sir.
What do you see in Photoshop?
We see in the browser.
Oh, work with smart objects, right? Okay, it's not showing me that that is shared, but all right, so with smart objects, you can work with vector data such as vector artwork from Illustrator that otherwise would be rasterized in Photoshop. And again, I did show you from the last class how we could actually, let me just delete this layer, right? How we could actually add elements such as vectors. Let's just throw in a rectangle. Let's just make it red. Let's make it a circle, an ellipse. So we throw it over his and like a boxing glove, since that is the biggest thing in my awkward transform, right? So we can save this. So notice that's a smart object that we're editing, right? The PSB file. Close and save. What do you think is going to happen? So let's get this out of the way. The original file is edited and it includes the vector object that we added in the smart object. So that smart object, even though it's still one layer, within itself, it contains, we go edit contents, 2 layers, a bitmap layer with a mask and a vector shape layer. We can actually modify it again. Let's just put the circle over his face so we can see an obvious change. Close, save, yes. Again, what do you think is gonna happen? The object, the smart object is updated to show the change, and it now includes the very same objects, but this time the vector object is over the face. Right? So another benefit of the smart object is you can work with multiple layers, right? Including vector layers and raster layers together. And you can keep your vector data intact. You don't have to rasterize them in order to work with a single rasterized like file. Okay? Everybody understand that? Here's another benefit. We can perform non-destructive filtering, meaning we can edit filters applied to smart objects at any time. What do we mean by that? Anybody can tell me what we mean by non-destructive filtering?
So like the saturation thing?
The what?
Color saturation thing? Like color saturation.
Okay, no. So color saturation is actually an adjustment. We want to make a distinction between adjustments and filtering. A filter, let me just show you. A filter, we get using the filter menu. And basically filters give you special effects, right? Or well, we know what filters are. Everybody have Instagram and all sorts of filter apps these days, right? So they apply filters over objects. Usually, if you have a raster object, right, and we apply a filter, so let's say we've been using the Gaussian blur filter to create shadows previously. So let's use the Gaussian blur filter. And let's blur this object, which is LeBron. So this is what the Gaussian blur does, right? Normally, your filters are destructive, meaning they change the pixels. So now that we've blurred this object, we cannot come back to the original. We cannot get it back nice and crisp. The object is what it is. Yes, Photoshop allows us to step back into history, so we can go back and toggle last state, right? And toggle last, actually, we can do undo move and undo Gaussian blur, Control Z, right? And get it back. But that is really not, that is stepping backwards. If we make the change or apply the filter Gaussian blur and we go through more steps in history than Photoshop can recall, we're not going to be able to come back to it, right? And we also have to go back sequentially, meaning we have to undo everything we did between the filter and the time we decide to step back. However, look at this. This is our smart object here. Let's take off the non-smart object. And we're going to apply a filter to our smart object. So let's look at it, filter. Let's apply the same Gaussian blur. So blur, Gaussian blur. See, we get the same blur effect, okay? But look at the important difference. In your layers panel, you now have an additional layer or additional part of layer 0, which is called smart filters. And your Gaussian blur is actually applied as a smart filter in a separate layer. What that means is at any point in time, you can turn it off or turn it back on, which you cannot do with a regular layer. So again, going back to the benefits of our smart objects, we can perform non-destructive filtering. We can edit filters applied to objects at any time. So not only we can turn it off and turn it on, but we can double click on it and change the values. We can make it more blurry, right? Or less blurry, which is something else that we cannot do with the regular raster objects. Everybody hear me clearly? I just got a message about my bandwidth being unstable again. Everybody can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir, for now.
All right, cool. Everybody understand non-destructive filtering and the other benefits so far? Yes? Any questions on that? Okay. More benefits. You can edit one smart object and automatically update all its linked instances. I'm going to demonstrate that in a little while. Let's just run through the rest of the benefits. We can apply a layer mask that's either linked or unlinked to the smart object layer. And we can try various designs with low resolution placeholder images that we can later replace with final visions. What can you not do with smart objects though? You can't perform operations that alter the pixel data, such as painting, dodging, burning, or cloning directly to the smart object layer, unless it's first converted into a regular layer, which will be rasterized. So to demonstrate, let's go back to our LeBron here. Our rasterized layer that we keep performing destructive edits on. If we grab our paintbrush right now, we have a red brush. We can paint on him at any time. We can paint on the pixels, edit the pixels at any time. If we go to our smart object, which is layer 0, notice with the same tool, we have an option. We have a cannot do that sign. This smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. And it's asking, rasterize the smart object. We do not want that, so we cancel. If we wanted to paint over the Lakers, for instance, red, how would we do that, guys? Can anybody tell me right now? To the smart object. I'm trying to do it with the brush. I can't do it. How would we do that? So I can right click on this smart object, edit contents, which will open up the smart object for me as a file showing me all of the layers, the vector layers, the raster layers, which are editable. Now, if I want to perform a non-destructive edit, I'm going to make a new layer and paint over the Lakers logo with that red brush on that new layer. Again, keeping it non-destructive. And I close. It's asking me if I want to save. Yes, to save. And that's how I would paint over the smart object. I cannot do it directly because I'll get this error, but I must edit it to, I must edit the smart object to modify any pixel objects within it directly. All right. Everybody with me so far in terms of what smart objects are and how we would use them? Let me give you a more real world example of what we would do with smart objects. So I'm not going to save the changes, so I'm going to close it. And let me open up a file for you guys to see. I have a file here, which is my old business card. The reason I have it close by is because I need some new ones, so I'm going to get some of those done. All right, this is what my business card currently looks like. Yeah. Notice it's a Photoshop document. It has multiple layers, right? And everything is editable. We either have vector layers, text layers, shape layers, or in the case of my logo, we have, well, why we have it rasterized here, we have it as a vector smart object right below, all right? Okay, let's close this. I'm gonna show you the way that you create both types of smart objects. No? Everybody remember what are the two types of smart objects? Let's create a new document, 8.5 by 11, standard sheet. Can anybody recall what are the two types of smart objects within Photoshop? All right. So you can actually place a smart object or create a smart object by simply placing a Photoshop document or another file on the current document that you're working with. All right. So the two types of smart objects, you have embedded smart objects and you have linked smart objects. Everybody get that? Let me know you actually get that. You have embedded smart objects and linked smart objects. What is the difference between the two? Anybody can tell me what they think is the difference between an embedded and a linked smart object? Are you sleeping tonight? Keep talking to myself.
So the link, maybe for the embedded, the link, maybe there, and the linked, place link, you have to get it from somewhere from the next file or something.
Okay, that's close enough. All right, so let's look at the embedded first. Actually, yeah, let's look at the embedded. So let's place embedded. And what that will allow me to do is to select a file somewhere on my computer. Let's go. Yeah. And select the business card. And if I place it, notice it's a regular Photoshop document, but I'm going to place it. And what will happen is Photoshop will place it in my document as a smart object. Once I confirm the placement, notice I have a smart object here. It's a single file, a single layer, right? Called Leonard Green, which is the name of the file. And I can manipulate it as a single object. However, if I right click and I go to edit contents, what I have is my full business card and all of the layers within it. So all of that is contained within that single smart object. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let me.
Yes, sir.
Right. So that is my
Yes, sir.
embedded smart object. Let us place a linked smart object here. Place linked. And I'm going to put the same object, Leonard Green, but this time we're placing it as a linked object. Confirm. All right. So both of these are smart objects. One is embedded, one is linked. Can you guys tell which is which? The clue is, look at this thumbnail in the layers panel. This one has a chain link. This one has a little document icon. This is the linked document. So let's put the linked one below because it's physically below on the document. So the one at the bottom is linked. Let's rename that to linked. And the one at the top is embedded. Let's rename that to embedded. All right. What is the difference between a linked file and between a linked smart object and an embedded smart object? Let me show you an easy way to make it apparent. If you modify the original file, remember the original file you imported to get the smart object? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, again, just a red ellipse, a red circle above the beautifully designed card so we can see the obvious change. And I close and save. Look at this. That is a completely different document. You realize that? That's a document that I was working with. I had two smart objects on. Look at the linked smart object. The linked smart object was updated to show the change in the file that is saved somewhere completely different, while the embedded one was left unchanged. Everybody see that difference?
Yes.
All right. Any questions on how that happened? No. All right. So let's just finish.
Yes,
You have a question? Go ahead.
I want to know what happened.
You want to know how it happened? The reason it happened is because that is a linked smart object.
I
Meaning,
want to know what happened.
okay. The reason why it happened is because that is a linked smart object. A linked smart object is actually tied to the original file wherever it's located. So if you edit the original file, it's going to edit all linked versions of the smart object, even on other files. Okay? So let us go back to our document and let's finish read through it, see if we can understand it any better. So we looked at, we understand how we create an embedded smart object, right? We go place and place embedded. And we understand how we would create a linked smart object, which is file and place linked. Now, one of the advantages of using a linked smart object is that because the data is saved in a separate document, obviously the link smart the file that you save the link smart object in will be smaller, slightly. However, look at this. If an external source file changes while a Photoshop document referencing it is open, the relevant link smart object is automatically updated. However, when you open a Photoshop document containing an out of sync link smart object, meaning if the document was closed, right, then you can update the smart objects manually using that method. Okay. Now, one of the tools, just check our timer here. All right. One of the tools that comes in handy when you're working with the smart object is your properties panel, which can give you information about your smart object. So if we click on the embedded smart object and we go to our properties bar, notice it shows us that it's an embedded smart object. And we have options to edit the contents here or to convert it to a linked smart object here, right? And if we click on the linked smart object, notice it shows us it's a linked smart object. It shows us the location of the original file, so we can find it. We can also edit the contents, meaning edit the original file, or we can convert it to an embedded smart object from a linked smart object by clicking the embed button. So we can embed this. Let's embed it. Notice right now the icon changed. We now have two embedded smart objects. And I can fix that blob on top of it by right clicking the link. Well, it's now embedded. Go to edit right click, go to edit contents. And I can just remove that shape over my smart object, close, save. And notice the red blob is removed from the, well, now embedded. Let me change it. So this was previously linked. All right. Everybody understand that in general? The difference between an embedded smart object and a linked smart object and what a smart object actually is? Yes, no? See a couple chats here. Okay, I guess I was earlier. Everybody good with that so far? Any questions for me?
No, sir.
No questions, sir.
All right.
Wrong side. Wait, but
Okay. So remember that the first homework that I gave you was to isolate two objects, but keeping it non-destructive, right? I want you to take it one step further for today for homework. I want you to create a scene for me, right? I see some of you actually did that, so that's good. But using your objects that were isolated using a non-destructive method, I want you to convert them into smart objects to actually develop your scene. So convert your isolated objects into smart objects, right? And use them to create a scene for me. This time you're using raster images. So that means your scene can look like anything, right? Your very first scene, you had to use vector images or vector objects, meaning shapes and so on. So you were sort of limited, but right now I'm not limiting you at all. I want you to create the sickest scene that you can come up with for me, right? As many objects as you want to use, right? But I want you to keep all of your original objects intact, use non-destructive methods, meaning when you isolate them, don't just cut them out, but mask them, convert them to a smart object, and then use them in your scene. Everybody good with that? Everybody understand what they have to do for me for homework?
Yes, sir, noted.
All right, and that is
Yes, sir.
working with smart objects. Also, I did send you that document.
So,
Yes?
is it possible if you could like send like a written something in the group chat for the homework, because like in between I hearing some cracking, so I'm not really hearing everything you're saying.
All right, so I will send something written in the group chat for the homework.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody else good? I also sent you guys in the group chat that document that we were reading from today, which includes a bit more information about the smart objects, right? We sort of went through it, how you would edit the content, apply smart filters and so on. All right, so all of these will be relevant in your editing for homework. So please review it. Let me know if you have any issues. All right, feel free to send me a message or whatever the case might be. Now we have less than a minute. Does anybody need us to come back in to answer any questions? Let me first get a quick screenshot. Does anybody need us to come back in?
So that homework day is for next class, right?
That homework is for next class, yes.
Okay, it's all right.
Now,
So I have a question.